And I am happy to be here today to contribute to the thinking that's about the future of the Goulburn Murray, the future of Yorta Yorta peoples, Aboriginal peoples that are on Yorta Yorta countries, all peoples. And as Yorta Yorta people, whether we think there's an optimism about the flourishing and the prosperity of Yorta Yorta culture, Yorta Yorta identity, and its integrated approach within the mainstream society. And it's quite a challenging proposition to think about how that might occur. And it's how do we reframe the position of Aboriginal people, Yorta Yorta people, into this thinking about the future of Shepparton, Echuca, Wangaratta, the towns that we're a part of, the river systems that we're a part of, and the prosperity of this region. So I feel a little bit insecure about it all, and I feel communication is a critical tool and a critical issue, and it was touched on just before about the value of the arts in communication, about culture and identity, belonging, those types of things. And these forums, they somehow limit our capacity to reach into each other's space and to change people's perceptions of how we do things. And I think I'm challenged also by the lack of cultural competency within the mainstream to receive the information that's coming out of Aboriginal community, the language that's coming out of community, the communication that's coming out of community, and to respond in a real affirmative, positive way. 2014, we're describing the deficits of Aboriginal community, and that's been occurring for the last 150, 200 years. And we're looking for ways to talk about the assets, to talk about the value of Indigenous peoples. And primarily we've gone to things like the arts, to sports, to some of the stereotypes of where it might be exploited, the value of Indigenous people's participation in mainstream economies and mainstream culture. And I'd want to think that, as a collective, and I've got lots and lots of friends in the room, and as a collective we can tackle this issue, and we can tackle it as a community, and we can tackle it as collaborative leadership on the way forward. And if we isolate it into the silos of need, we're not going to be able to address the core issues facing Aboriginal people in this community of Shepparton. And Shepparton really can't celebrate, the Goulburn Valley, the Goulburn Murray can't celebrate until such times as the Indigenous peoples are achieving the same levels of prosperity that all peoples should be achieving. So that's a sort of a covering sort of comment, I suppose, about my role in this. And I feel like I'm standing here with Aboriginal people outside waiting for me to deliver a message and to come back to them, well, what happened? What was the response? And I feel like I'm standing here with the generations of my ancestors supporting me in this process. And I'll try and explain this as I go through my talk, which is only now 12 minutes or thereabouts. So I've been conscious of looking for the indicators that drive a sense of optimism, and I've made a conscious decision to try and get to the preventative space, to go upstream a bit and find out address the issues that are causing the challenges that we face, because since the 1970s we've worked really, really hard on addressing the crisis of interventions in Aboriginal people's lives. And we're looking to see how we change that. If we've only ever got a strategy around intervention, we're not going to actually achieve the future optimism that we should be looking for. And I still think we're dealing with the onslaught of assimilation and the notions of racial superiority that are both pre and post invasion of Aboriginal lands. And we have to deal with that as a sense of truth and honesty as a way of moving forward. So I carry a couple of jobs within Yorta Nations, the famous Rumballara Football Netball Club, the Coyote Institute. And another interesting one is the First Nations Foundation, which was about establishing an Aboriginal credit union that has preceded all of the work on with the financial services networks across Australia on Indigenous financial services. But this Yorta people's history of leadership in this region, and I think it has built the relationship. Cummeragunja is a critical place. It's a critical contemporary place. It's also a critical historical place in the lives of our people. But the advocacy that came out of Cummeragunja in the 1800s, the leadership that's come from there, has been critical in the rights issues for Aboriginal people. And I think it's built this relationship between Shepparton and Echuca as the two primary interfaces with Aboriginal people. And there is a sense of tension in that relationship between Aboriginal leadership and non-Aboriginal leadership. And I think in Shepparton we are driving an aspiration within the Aboriginal peoples and within the mainstream for radical change that builds on addressing opportunity in our community. We have high ambitions about, on Yorta country, on Goulburn Valley, to be the first region, as a measurement anyway, to close this gap on life expectancy, quality of life, wealth creation, all of the things that we might think are aspirational issues that all people can aspire for. But this also includes, from my perspective, closing the gap on cultural competency or lack of competency around Indigenous issues. And here in the Goulburn Valley, we've built a track record of successful organisations. They are the premier organisations here in Shepparton, Mooroopna, that are the leadership flagships around Australia. And the work that's been coming out of the Goulburn Valley, along currently now with what Noel and others have been doing up in the Cape, have come together to produce some challenging opportunities now for mainstream Australia, not just here in the Goulburn Valley, but around the country, to address this issue of futures. This is Yorta country. Echuca, Finley, Toke, these are all the towns that sit on Yorta country. This is the homelands of my people. There's quite a number of clan groups that sit on that, in that country. But you talk around the prosperity of that country, and you talk about the prosperity of Indigenous peoples, and there's a huge imbalance. That was our economic source of sustenance, our spiritual source of sustenance, our social source of sustenance, and it got flipped on its head with the invasion of lands of Indigenous peoples. We're trying to reposition the economic capacity of Indigenous peoples now, and the social capacity to engage in this thinking of futures for Indigenous peoples. We're talking about spiritual issues related to country and the transition from Aboriginal spirituality to Christian belief systems that underpin culture and identity. And these are the sort of things that, as Aboriginal people, we're trying to rationalise how we bring that into the mainstream economies. And how do we do that whilst we're paying respects to our ancestors? In that notion of country, my grandfather was born in about 1855, 56. He was 110, 109 in 1964 when he passed away. They carried enormous wealth of knowledge that disappeared in their passing. enormous amount of culture and identity that they were giving to my father, my mother, in the transition of language, knowledge, culture and identity. But there was an impasse. There was a wall put up where my grandfather, who could speak 6 languages, couldn't pass that on to his kids. My mother didn't get to experience the development of language. Now, we're shifting culture, we're shifting identity, we're recreating economic development, we're thinking now, how do we sustain ourselves in this environment? And from a wealth position, or from a sense of value and worth, what is it that we bring as Aboriginal people into this new world? And so, you know, the reflection of that is not about the value of need in terms of how many people in jails, how many people are dying young, how many people not getting to education, not getting through schools, all of the negative deficit sort of language that describes us. How do we build new language that describes, like what was saying, about the value of the people in this economy? And that's a challenge. That land has been there, and we've had thousands of generations of our people born and die and be embedded in the land on which we stand. And we don't forget that. Access economics here, we've tried to have a think about this, and the context of change is in both current and historical facts, and the context of value is in notions of terra nullius and notions of what's civilised, what's uncivilised in terms of culture and identity. We've talked about, well, what's the value? If we close the gap in the Goulburn Valley between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, it's worth, you know, in the vicinity of $61 million to the economy for people. And it's about 300 jobs, and those jobs are the average. They're the mainstream average of jobs. And it's people living to the life expectancy, but not just living to the life expectancy, and the quality of life that goes with that. The elements of our vision include Indigenous kids skip to school. Well, you know, what does that mean? What's happening in Aboriginal people's lives? What's happening in Aboriginal families' lives? Are they skipping to school on their own? Or have they got mates of all sorts of different origins going with them? And how is the school responding? So they're really excited about getting to school. And it's a sense of aspiration then on Aboriginal families that they're using the education system as a pathway to the aspirations of future. The elements of our vision include Indigenous language. We've got 2 people that can teach Yorta Yorta language. They're teaching at the present as we speak. Is strongly celebrated and integrated into the language and lives of people in the Goulburn Valley. This is about sharing a culture and the sharing of the value of culture, so that we don't have to leave our culture on the edge of town. We can actually bring it in. It'll be shared. There'll be reciprocity, and I think, you know, if we talk about the Treaty of Waitangi and we talk about the way the Maori people are doing it, or the way New Zealand's doing it, you can have a sense of what's possible. Our rights and connection to country are respected, celebrated and shared by all. And I might say that, you know, we haven't sat idle in just bringing that vision about. And it's not the first time we've advocated for that vision. We've been thrown a lifeline, we've thrown the lifeline to our people in the last 18 years, 20 years, and we've developed some tools, I suppose, of communication. We've presented our case for reform to people of Shepparton, to all levels of government. We've gone through COAG processes, to philanthropy, to civic leaders, etc. And this is a fantastic opportunity to think this stuff through. And the next steps on strategic thinking in relation to this approach to the future of Goulburn Murray is really critical to our sense of future. The Football Netball Club, as we know, is doing more than just being a football netball club. Established in 97, 80% of our team is unemployed. Today, we're 90% employed. 18 years, there's never been a youth suicide inside the club. Prior to that, there was a spate of suicides that caused us to create programs around mental health, counselling, psych services access, those types of things. But from Shepparton, we've established that. We've established the First Nations Foundation that's driving change with the Australian Financial Services Council. We've established the Victorian Indigenous Leadership Network. We established the Victorian Aboriginal Community Control Health Organisation Secretariat and structure for Aboriginal medical services. And now we're working with regions across Australia to talk about empowered communities. And I think that's what we're all talking about, is empowered communities and their ability to engage. Tracking success is really an important element. I don't think that's been done very well. That data relating to Indigenous peoples has been siloed across bureaucracies, and there's no composite data sets that you can really rely on. And we've worked really hard to try and find what was happening in employment, what was happening in education, etc. But some of the successes that we're talking about in the last while is the 17% increase in employment, which is against the national trends, which is against state trends. It's particular to the work we've been doing in this part of the country, and why people are looking to us now to say, well, what's best practice that we can learn from? We've taken income up by 21% on wealth creation in our families. So that's not just Aboriginal leadership, that's a collective approach that's been happening in Shepparton for the last 15 to 20 years. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here when we say we're trying to set up a new way forward. We've got a way forward. We've been working on it. We need to bring it into an integrated strategy around futures of the Goulburn Murray. Juvenile justice, this is the best place. We've reduced juvenile justice by 76% according to the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. Fantastic. But what that has meant is also that nationally the National Crime Prevention Council has recognised the work here with between the co-op and the football club and the police with a national award. But those three areas might be identified, but it is a collective, collaborative approach to the issues facing young people. And you would say that young people are much happier in this community. Kids are much happier here than they are in Mildura or Robinvale or other towns where there's high issues of youth suicide and high incarceration of kids. And I think that's a really telling numbers to say that what we're doing in Shepparton is working, and it's been working really well, but it needs that to be shared on the collaboration on what that strategy might look like going forward. Challenges facing the Goulburn Valley. We need to target these barriers. We need to target these issues, and they're not nothing that it's not new to everybody. But the sense of, do I belong in Shepparton or do I belong on the riverbank is a real classic issue for Aboriginal people. Can I come into town and can I be a part of this economy and not face the racial discrimination that has been apparent in the city of Greater Shep and in Echuca. But the radical change requires us at the bottom to establish a shared vision. So I want to work with you, I suppose, to actually, how do we bring that about? So if there's a $12 billion agricultural industry operating on your country, we want to know how to get into that. We want to find ways to become a part of that. But what are the learnings that we have to take on board to do that? The empowered communities approach that I've just spoken about is the challenge of radical change potentially sits behind this approach. As a result of collaboration across these regions, led by Noel Pearson in Cape York, and here, Aboriginal leadership here in the Goulburn Valley. This has been put on the table for 8 regions to come together to talk about shared best practice, to talk through the Prime Minister's office about the collaboration with government and how to get accountability operating at a regional level. And this could mean setting up something like a productivity commission that measures the effectiveness of resource allocation here in the Goulburn Valley across the sort of KPIs that we may establish for ourselves, and establishing those key priorities in the region, whether they be culture, arts, health, education, those types of things, and how we're actually tracking on those. This is in the design phase, and it should be within Prime Ministers. It should be about August before the actual design is finished. It has a strong focus on collecting data and evidence to inform decision making about program policy development and resource allocation in our region. So we think this is a useful tool to add to what we're talking about. Our partnerships that we've been working really hard to generate. So it's exciting people that this is an optimistic region. It's a region that's got the future in its sights. People know why they're coming in, how they're coming in, strategically how they could be used. And collectively, there's much more than this going on. But these are some of the groups that have said, look, we're happy and we're keen to contribute to this future of the Goulburn Valley. And this is not isolating it into an Aboriginal specific strategy. It's a shared strategy that becomes the future of people. Defining the Goulburn Murray region, I think, is a great thing. It's the opportunity to create the community we want, that we can all aspire to, that we can all be proud of, that we can say is inclusive, and prosperity is there for all to achieve if they work and do the things, and we work hard enough to bring that about. But this requires strategy, it requires resourcing, and it definitely requires courage to change the status quo. We're going to feel a little bit uneasy because we're changing some of the social norms of behaviour, of relationships, and it will challenge us, no doubt about that. But it's got to be supplemented and endorsed and supported by honesty and accountability and ownership. So we also have this sense of ownership. Nobody's telling us what to do. There's no external bodies taking the ownership. It's shared, and we take it on board. So this is my 15 minutes of a conversation about what's going on, what our thoughts are, and our readiness and willingness to participate in this. And we want to use that to share with you guys and everybody around about how we take this forward. Thank you very much.